And welcome to the Rob Call Bottom Up Show, sponsored by opednews.com. Available on... Oh.
Hang on one second. Hello? Hello?
And welcome to the Rob Call Bottom Up Show, sponsored by opednews.com, progressive news and opinion, and available at Pacifica Radio Network, Progressive Radio Network, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and more. I'm really excited to have as my guest for this show Senator Mike Gravel, who is one of my heroes. He's a former senator from Alaska. He was a presidential candidate in 2008, and he's now a presidential candidate again for the Democratic primary for this election. He's my hero because he had the courage to release Daniel Ellsberg's Pentagon papers. So great to have you back on the show.
Thank you for having me. I enjoy it.
It's a pleasure. The first time we met was at a Washington conference for progressives. Then I met you again. When you were excluded from a primary debate in Philly in 2008, and you held a separate kind of rally nearby. And so here they're doing it to you again. And I know that you raised the money necessary to get to have the requisite number. Was it 65,000 donors?
No, we got 68,000 donors. And what happened, Rob, is that they said that I didn't qualify under the qualification of polling. Well, we did. I did get in one poll that they recognized. However, they did not submit my name to the other pollsters that they said that they were authorizing. And then when we contacted them, they said, well, it wasn't their job to submit my name. The polling company, of their own volition, picked who they wanted to measure.
So basically, the pollsters decided who the Democratic Party was going to have on the stage.
Exactly. So
that's disgusting.
It doesn't sound. It's very suspicious on both ends.
Well,
one, it shouldn't be happening that way with the pollsters, and two, the Democratic Party should have made sure that all of the candidates who qualified for 65,000 donors should be in the polls so that they're measured. They didn't want me to be measured. They didn't want me to be on a stage, and I think Perez met with my kids' campaign managers back east, and he was somewhat dismissive of me in that regard. Well, my view of Perez is he's a holdover from the Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama campaign.
Totally. Oh, by the way, having followed your tweet stream, this does go on terrestrial radio, so you got to watch your language.
Well, the kids gave me veto power, and I've only exercised it once when I told them to cut down the use of the F word.
Yeah, well, you don't need to worry about it for Twitter, but you do for terrestrial. So I figured there's a couple things I want to talk to you about, but the main thing I wanted to do is to give you a voice so that you could say what you would have said in the debates.
Well, the subject that I wrote about, and that is Trump is making an issue that the Democrats are socialists because of Bernie Sanders avowing that he's a Democratic socialist. Well, that's very good because socialism is really nothing more than an institution for the people to act collectively on issues they care about. So if that's socialism, there's nothing wrong with that. So we have a democratic socialism, which means that the issues that we're concerned about all benefit the people. However, there's such a thing as Republican socialism, and they don't want to talk about that. Republican socialism is empowering the 1%. It's supporting the military-industrial complex. It's supporting all of the negative things that could happen to the people, and it continues to provide for a monopoly on lawmaking. So that's what Republican socialism is all about. And so what we have to do in the course of the campaign, all the Democrats have to weigh in on a comparison between democratic socialism and Republican socialism. And if the Democrats don't do that, they're real stupid, because Trump will continue to try and demonize and degrade the definition of the word socialism. So whenever you hear Republicans talking about democratic socialism, we got to talk about Republican socialism and how it damages the people. So that's what I would have raised had I been on the stage. And obviously that's not injurious to the Democratic Party. It's helpful. But what the mainstream media with Perez on the Democratic Party, they don't want to empower the progressives. They got some concept that the middle of the road is what's going to get them elected. I got to tell you, the middle of the road is a failure in the making. Because when you talk middle of the road, you're talking about people that don't have the guts to decide what's important and to support that. And so what they want is people who are wishy-washy, who, a la Joe Biden, aren't going to be. So all this will happen. If they set up the Democratic Party to put forth a candidate like that, Trump will eat him alive.
I agree. And we're listening to Senator Mike Gravel, who is one of the Democratic primary presidential candidates. Now, Senator, you say you just mentioned and talked about the idea of Republican socialism. How would that apply to Trump? What is he doing that is Republican socialism?
Well, first off, the tax cut that he takes such credit for was chief beneficiary was the 1%. Well, that's using government to put money into the pockets of the 1%. So that's socialistic activity. But it's Republican socialism, not Democratic socialism. The other thing is the way he's handling the immigration problem, which is cruel and inhuman. That's Republican socialism, not Democratic socialism. Would be much more humane and address the problem in a very direct kind of way.
It makes me think of the Gulag.
Very much so. Very much so. What you want to do is continually make the comparison between what's being done for the Republican 1% and what's being done for the American people. What's being done for the American people is democratic socialism. What's being done for the 1% is, of course, Republican socialism. And that comparison has to be made continuously, because what will happen, the strategy that Trump is advocating will backfire on him.
And it really, what you're talking about could also be described as Republican welfare, too.
But let's use socialism, because that's the word they're trying to demonize.
Okay. And now, one of the big topics of the debate was Medicare for all. You have any ideas or thoughts about it, or any responses to what some of the candidates said?
Well, first off, I'm very much for Medicare for all and support Bernie and Elizabeth and Tulsi Gabbard in that regard. Now, when they say, well, it's going to cost so much, and they keep saying that, people want to keep their private health care programs, that's crap. People don't want to continue paying for health care out of their pockets. They want it paid for by the system. And so that's what we're talking about, is a health care program that's paid for by the taxpayers, but also is offset by the amount of money that is saved by taking the burden off of companies and enterprises, who are then made more competitive in the world, in the competition. So it's really a joke that they're playing on the people to say, you can keep your private healthcare system. Of course, you're going to pay through the nose for it, but they think they're selling something. They're selling a bunch of crap, and that's, of course, what has to be pointed out. The answer is to do what 40 other industrial countries are doing, and that is have the general public, through taxation, through government, pay for health care. And then that way you get universal health care for everybody and a high quality health care at that. Right now, we spend 30% of our health care dollar on administration. That's administration to satisfy the needs of the pharmaceutical industry and the needs of the insurance industry. It makes no sense to be able to say that, well, we have to subsidize the insurance industry in order to deliver health care. That makes no sense at all. And that's, of course, what Republican socialism is advocating to take place.
Now, you had the centrist moderates on the debate, like Biden, attacking Medicare for all. What would you respond to Biden in particular? What would you say to him?
Well, what they're saying is that they're saying they're taking Republican talking points. That's what Biden is doing. He's taking the Republican talking points and attacking Medicare for all. Well, Medicare for all is just that. It benefits all people equally. And so to turn around and say, well, we can't go there. That's too expensive. Well, we spend all this money on the military-industrial complex. Why can't we spend it also on the people for their health care, for their education, for the infrastructure? So when Biden et al. And his ilk turn around and say, well, we got to be, we can't quite afford this. We're going to take it piecemeal. Well, piecemeal means that you're not going to do anything. That's the way to scuttle it, is to do a piecemeal. No, this isn't rocket science, right? I have Medicare, and it's fabulous. There's no reason why it shouldn't be available to all American citizens. I also use my veterans benefits. There's no reason why this shouldn't be available to all Americans. And so these are the things that are so important and are poo-pooed by the likes of Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, who really tell us that we got to stick with the old Obamacare. Obamacare was a system of subsidizing the insurance companies and subsidizing pharmaceutical companies, and this, of course, was Obama and Hillary and Biden. It's not good enough. What we want is something for all the people to take care of their health care, and when we see that in Canada, we see that in Britain, we see that in the European countries. There's no reason why we can't see that here.
Now, we spoke back in 2016, and you were supporting Bernie then. Are you still supporting Bernie as your first choice?
Both Bernie and Tulsi Gabbard. If Bernie gets the nomination, I hope he'll pick Tulsi as vice president and vice versa. So those are the two people that I think should be the team leading the country. Bernie is, has got his critique him because of his age. Tulsi meets the age requirement. So they'd make a wonderful team. And of course, Tulsi supported Bernie in the 2008 round when he was cheated out of the nomination by Hillary and Obama and Perez.
You mean 2016?
2008. He was cheated. He would have beaten Trump. He would have beaten Trump.
Now, so actually, in 2008, you ran and they cheated you. They cut you out of the debates. I remember arguing with Chuck Todd about that at pre-debate in Philadelphia, where they had kept you off, and he gave some cockamamie excuse to use Biden's phrase. But you're saying that who was it who cheated Bernie in 2016?
Obama, Hillary, and Wasserman Schultz.
Absolutely.
And we saw that Bernie could have beaten Trump. The polls showed him beating Trump. And of course, they said by sabotaging Bernie, they put up Hillary, who was a flawed candidate. And of course, Trump ate her lunch.
Very, very flawed. And they knew it.
Bernie is the only one that I can see. Bernie and Tulsi are the only ones that I can see that could beat Trump today.
Okay. And why is that?
Because they're stronger. They've got gravitas, and they've been around the horn. And so Trump, Tulsi took on Obama when he was president, and she was a member of the House. That took guts. Tulsi is the only one that I know of, other than Bernie, that's prepared to fight to dissolve the military-industrial complex. And so that takes courage because she's from a state where the military presence is very strong. So that's Tulsi. And Bernie, the same way, he has courage to give away. And so I think the two of them would be an unbelievable team. One is president, the other is vice president.
I agree with you. I think they make a great combination. You spent 12 years in the Senate. How has the Senate changed?
Not very much. It's still partisan. When people say that, who stole the American dream? You know who stole the American dream? That was the people who wrote the Constitution. The framers of the Constitution stole the American dream because they did not permit the people to have procedures and tools to be able to make laws. And so that gave the representatives a monopoly on lawmaking in order to protect slavery, because that's what was in the Constitution for perpetuity.
And you mentioned before we started the recording that you wanted to talk about legislature of the people.
Yes. I have worked for the last 25, 30 years on developing a process whereby we would be able to create and operate a legislature of the people, where people would be able to make laws in parallel with their representatives, but independent of representative government. And then I have a process in the book coming out called The Failure of Representative Government and a Solution to People. That book will be out in September. And that is essentially a detailed manual as to how to enact a constitutional amendment without the government and how to enact a federal law without the government that would then set us up to be able, as individual citizens, to go in and make laws and vote for laws that we find are important and beneficial to us. There's only two venues for change. One is the government that doesn't want any changes because it would disrupt the 1% power. The other is the people, but the people cannot effect change unless they can put in place the tools that will permit them to amend constitutions and to write laws and enact laws. That's the tool that needs to be done. Presently, representative government has a monopoly given by the people who are protecting slavery back in 1787, 88, 89. And so now what we have to do is that we have to put in place the tools and procedures so the people can make laws, so they can then participate. Now, there's only one venue where the people can participate in government. That is to bring the people into a lawmaking capacity. They can't be in the executive, they can't be in the judiciary, but they can be in a legislative body. And this is a body that could have 100 million or more people participating as lawmakers. And I've laid out in detail all of this activity to enact the law, to amend the Constitution, and then to operate in a legislative, deliberative fashion, the people acting as lawmakers.
What's the name of the book?
The Failure of Representative Government and a Solution, the People.
The Fear of Representative Government?
The failure
of
representative government and a solution to this failure, and that's the people. And it should be out in September.
You have a publisher?
Yes, Author House.
Great.
So they could just go to Author House. And of course, right now, people can buy Citizen Power, which is on my website at mikegravel.us. And Citizen Power has the elements in there in addition to other polemics. But the new book coming out is a lot more detailed as to how to bring about this legislation by the people.
Okay. Let's get back to the debates, because there were other topics that were raised. One is dealing with law and order. What's your take on law and order, and what are the issues, and what are the problems, and what are the solutions?
Well, first off, the issue on law and order is that we put all these people in jail partly because of marijuana, but also partly because the justice system is rigged against the poor. Tulsi Gabbard at the last debate really took Kamala Harris really and cleaned her clock on this subject. She's been a prosecutor, and in one instance, she opposed a person who's on death row getting off because there were exculpatory issues that indicated he shouldn't be on death row, and she would not change her mind in that regard. So no, Kamala Harris really had her head handed to her in the last debate by Tulsi Gabbard. And Tulsi did it very fairly, very directly, and just factually, nothing personality involved. So with respect to now I always felt that we should have the entire decriminalization of drugs, so that if a person has a cocaine habit, he should be able to go to a doctor, get a prescription, and be monitored by the health system and not by the criminal system. The country of Portugal has a great, which is incidentally a conservative Catholic country. They have a system of total decriminalization of all drugs. And this also exists in the Netherlands and in Switzerland. So there's no reason why we have to suffer the embarrassment of having more people in jail than they have in China and other countries around the world. We are the leaders in this regard. And so all that shows is that there's a real deficiency in our system of justice. And it truly is. And the basis of it is that the Supreme Court and all the federal judges and appeal judges, these are all people that are there for life. They're papists. And when you say that power corrupts, well, if you got power for the rest of your life, that's a corrupting agent on the judicial system. And that's the reason why we have to change that. And where we are, when we're able to make laws, we will be able to take and limit the amount of power of the Justice Department, the judges, to 12 years, and you're either up or you're out. And that's something that would really change the whole nature of our justice system, is to term limit judges just like we term limit other institutions.
Amen. Sounds great. What about immigration? That was another topic of debate and discussion. And so what's your take on immigration?
First off, we have to appreciate that this country was built by immigrants from the get-go. I mean, from the Plymouth Rock days, they were all immigrants. And so for us to take the nativist approach, and that is to say, hey, okay, wait, we got in and we like it and we're not going to let anybody else in, so pull up the gangplank. That's what the Republicans are doing, pulling up the gangplank, and people that are on the gangplank are falling into the water and into despair. No, what we need to do is to be able to have an immigration policy where people can come into our country very naturally, be employed, and then after the end of the working season, go back to their country with their money that they've made and saved. That's what we need. In fact, I always joke in saying, well, if we're going to have Trump's immigration policies, who's going to pick the lettuce? And since I live in California, there's a lot of lettuce that needs to be picked. And so what we need is for those people who want to come in under, call it a green card or an employment card, they would then work and then they would go back home. They don't want to stay in the United States. They're forced to stay in the United States because of what we're doing on the immigration side of things, putting up walls and making it difficult to go in and out. No, we should be basing our immigration policies on our needs for employment. There are a lot of jobs that Americans don't want to do, and foreigners would happily do them. And so to not provide for that with procedures is just stupid and quote, immoral because of what we're doing to try and punish people who desire to either work in the United States or participate in citizenship programs in the United States.
So what about the way they're holding people who are trying to cross the border? And what about people who sneak in? What about them? How does that get dealt with? What about the 10 million who are here?
Well, first off, people wouldn't be sneaking in if we had an intelligent program. They're They're only sneaking in because there's not an intelligent program for them to come in and work and take their money home at the end of the working season. So if we were to provide a system for guest workers like that, we wouldn't see people sneaking in. They just come in as a guest worker. So why would anybody want to sneak in at that point? So it's a false flag. It's ridiculous. And this is part of the stupidity of Trump and his machoism and his cruelty. He literally is very cruel towards people. And you know, I just can't say he is a narcissistic fool as an individual, and as a political leader, he's a racist, cruel person.
If you were to speak directly to Trump and you were in a debate with him, what would you say to him?
Well, first off, we'd have to take away all the obscenities that I would begin to hit him with. But what I'd say to him is that why don't you turn around and become a human being and respect your fellow human beings? And you should do that not only because you're a human being, but because you're president of the United States. You're a disgrace to the office. You're a disgrace to the country. And you're an embarrassment for us as Americans.
Okay.
And like I say, that's after I showered him with the proper obscenities.
Yeah, really. Okay. So we need to take another little break here. Let me just do a show ID. This is the Rob Call Bottom Up Show, sponsored by opednews.com, available on Pacifica Radio and on Progressive Radio Network and iTunes and Stitcher and SoundCloud. And for the radio show, I need to just do a 10-second pause so that we can, I can find it easily and edit it out. And put a bumper in. And my guest for this show is Senator Mike Gravel, one of my heroes, former senator from Alaska, the senator who introduced the Pentagon papers from Daniel Ellsberg into the Senate records. And he is running for Democratic president in the 2020 primary. So let's keep talking. The goal of this conversation, the main goal is to give you the voice that you didn't have at the debate. So another topic of the debate is education and dealing with the massive, I think it's $1.2 trillion student debt that has accumulated. What would you do? What's your take on that?
Rob, you judge a civilization by how it treats its youth and how it treats its seniors. And in both instances, we fail. Youth, here, when you turn around and you charge our youth or students, when you charge them these exorbitant sums for their education, who's going to benefit from that education? The future is going to benefit from that education. So you don't charge them for the benefits that they're going to provide. You turn around and make it as easy as possible for them to get as educated as possible. And whatever that cost is. Now, we've already done the damage. People have untold debt. That should be forgiven. It's in over $1 trillion. But we can take $1 trillion from the nuclear budget and wipe out all the debt in one fell swoop, and then turn around and require that public colleges will let children, students go to school without cost, free and clear. I had this when I took advantage of the GI Bill, and there's no reason why we shouldn't do this for the youth of the country. Here again, when you invest in the kids, when you invest in the youth, you are investing in seed corn that you're going to spread to the future. What we are doing right now is we are eating our seed corn and will leave ourselves bankrupt in the future because we will not have a future of educated people.
Okay. Speaking of seed corn, then there's the environment, the climate crisis. What's your take on where we need to go with that?
Well, here too, I think that AOC, Ocasio-Cortez, in the House has introduced a
the Green New Deal.
Green New Deal, which I think is great. What it is, essentially, it's a commitment by the country to make the environmental changes necessary on an ongoing basis and with the total effort of the country. Right now, we're going just the opposite direction. With when Obama says, "Oh, the economy is so great," sure, we're paying for a price for a good economy, a good stock market. And the price we're paying is to denigrate the environment by changing the regulations and rules of pollution in this country. This is what's being done under the leadership of Trump. Now, will we be able to repair this? It's going to be difficult because once we get a new person as president, then what we're going to do is reverse again and turn around and put in the regulations, put in the effort, rejoin the Paris Accord, turn around and create teeth to enforce the Paris Accord worldwide. And that's what we're going to have to do and really get us off carbon within the next decade. We can do that. It's not, we're not talking about nuclear technology or space technology. We're talking about photovoltaic. We're talking about wind energy and solar energy and all of that. And so this is all at hand. All we got to do is accelerate this activity so that we can cap the CO2 within the decade.
Okay, another topic that didn't really get, I'm going to cover a couple topics that didn't get much attention. One is the rights of women, Me Too, gay rights, the right for women to control their bodies. You have anything to say about that, where we are and where we're going?
Yeah, very much so. What I would have is we have a legislature of the people. Then we would introduce legislation to give equal rights to women, which of course were stalled with their ERA, but we could do that in a heartbeat under this new legislature of the people. In addition to give the same rights as we're giving to women to LGBTQ, and that would be enshrined in the Constitution, not as a federal law. And so that's what's possible if you have a legislature of the people in that regard. Now, there are a lot of other rights. I think Bernie is right on when he talks about the right of the people to have an education, the right of the people to have health care, the right of the people to be able to have economic security, and however that can be done. Now, I would have a proposal in that regard, and it's very straightforward. Andrew Yang is a good man, but he's a little wrong on passing out a $1,000 bill once a month to people. What we need to do is to provide all Americans with loans, loan them money to be able to buy capital goods, which then can produce to pay off the loan and then can produce to enrich the American people directly. That's essentially how capitalism works. The rich get richer by borrowing money, other people's money, and then buying capital tools and then paying off the tools with the profits from the production of capital. So that's what I would recommend, that for all Americans, and particularly those that are made obsolete by robots. Here we got a truck driver who drives a truck that's going to be out of a job because the truck is going to be able to drive itself in the not too distant future. Well, if that's the case, then what we ought to do is give a loan to the truck driver so he can buy the truck and then put the truck out to rental with and then take the profits from that rental and pay off the loan to the government. And then when it's all paid off, he puts the profits in his pocket. Go ahead.
So we had another brief. You're getting these calls for interviews as we speak. It's great. And how old are you?
I'm 89 years old.
89. I love it. I love it. I hope I can be doing what you're doing in some way when I'm your age. It's awesome.
Next May, I'll be 90. Can you imagine?
It's awesome.
I'm reminded of Warren Senator from the state of Washington. And he kept saying, if I had known I'd lived so long, I would have taken better care of my body.
Mm.
But I knock on wood somewhere. I'm blessed with good health, reasonably good health. At 89, it's all reasonably good health. But if I would never thought I'd live this long. Both my parents died when they were 72, and so here my sister, who's a couple of years younger than I am, she's still alive, and I got another sister that's just turned 80, and she's got some health problems. So we're chugging along, and I would love. What I really want to do is get my book out there in September, and then maybe some book appearances at bookstores around the country. It's maybe wishful thinking, but it's like the chief of staff, the person who was the chief of staff. In '88, I had a real bad health year. And so my wife was reporting to my staff, about 70, 80 people, that what the status of my health was. And so he joked and said, well, look at it. If there's any way to get Gravel healthy, it's to have him run for president.
Well, it's working with you here. So I want to keep on going. I just had a book come out. It's called The Bottom Up Revolution, and it's based on the idea that I believe we're transitioning from a top down to a more bottom up world, a more bottom up culture. Here's a copy of the cover of the book here.
Super. And I got to tell you, Rob, that's the only way that there's going to be a change of power. It's going to be a bottom up. There's no such a thing as top down. Top down is the 1% controlling our society. It's a minority rule process. What you're talking about from the bottom up is majoritarian rule. In majoritarian rule, the people protect themselves by their numbers, and they protect the minority by laws. This is what, so you're right on with that book, right on.
Thank you. And I wanted to keep going because another topic that really didn't get picked up on at all in the debates was international relations and diplomacy. Do you have thoughts on that?
Very much so. Our international relationship right now is waged by sanctions. We misuse the dollar because the dollar is a reserve currency. And I got to tell you, we're going to lose that favored position because of our abuses today. We sanction about 20 nations right now. We sanction countries like China and Russia, North Korea, and other countries. We sanction our friends. This is stupid. Sanctions are a way of waging war. Because when you sanction somebody, you are depriving them of the economic necessities of life, which means you're killing them. You're killing them. And that's what we've been doing with our sanctions from the get-go. We should not, and of course the Congress is complicit in the use of sanctions as much as the presidency. And it's wrong and it's immoral. I'll give you two examples. One is during President Clinton's administration, we sanctioned Iraq between the two wars, and we're responsible for the death of 500,000 kids. Now, we just had 500,000 people die in the United States over opioid problems, and we see how we're getting all exercise with that. Well, what about getting exercise over the 500,000 kids in Iraq that died as a result of sanctions? And Madeleine Albright, the Secretary of State, said, well, that's collateral damage. That's terrible. It's not collateral damage, it's murder. That's what it is.
Murder.
Now we see the same thing going on in Venezuela. We don't like the country of Venezuela. Who are we to determine whether or not they should have the government that they want? And that's what we're doing with sanctions. We're trying to turn over everybody's government just to satisfy our needs and to be able to continually invest in the dollar with their surplus and with their trade. They invest in the dollar, and that permits Americans to turn around and to abuse the dollar and pay for the standard of living that we don't deserve.
Now, one of the problems is the CIA loves to get involved in other countries. And I wonder if presidents even have the power to stop them from doing that.
They would if they had the commitment, because whoever created the CIA, which was the law under Truman, that could do away with it. But I think that the CIA and the military-industrial complex of Wall Street are so embedded in American society that we won't be able to change that until we create a legislature of the people. And once the people have the power to make laws, they'll be able to correct all of the intelligence agencies and the abuses by the White House of the human rights of the American people.
Okay, next, Russia. What's your take on this whole Russia threat, the whole narrative there?
It's ridiculous. Russia is no threat to us. We're a threat to them. We're sitting on their borders. I don't see them sitting on our borders of Mexico or Canada. Hell no. We're a threat to them. And when they imploded in was 98, we made a promise to them that we would not advance NATO any farther east. And of course, the minute Clinton came into president, he really advanced it further east into Poland, putting in Latvia, Lithuania, putting our ability to wage war on the doorsteps of Russia. Now, are they concerned about this? You better believe it. But you can you can judge the threat of Russia simply by looking at the numbers. We spend more on defense than the next 10 countries. Now, when we spend more on defense, how much is Russia spending on defense? Less than 10% of what we spend. So who is the more aggressive, warmongering military power, Russia or ourselves? The rational person would have to say, if we're spending 10 times more than what they're spending on defense, obviously we're the party that's interested in war.
But there's also that whole narrative about Russia trying to influence our elections and how they were the cause that Hillary lost. And your take on that?
That's this whole idea of Russia getting involved in our elections is bullshit. It is terrible. It's inaccurate. And the Democratic Party has bought into this with the Mueller investigation. And if there's anything, Trump was right. This was not what happened. And Benny, who's one of the persons in the organization of veterans, intelligence veterans, he did an analysis, and it showed that the Clinton files that were taken off the computer was done by a thumb drive. It wasn't done by any Russian hacking. So, but what happens is you've got the Democratic churning machine to demonize Russia, when in point of fact, they are acting more sanely than we are in the global marketplace.
So let's talk about the Democratic Party, the Democratic leadership in the DNC. Tell us about them.
Well, I got to tell you, if Trump gets elected, it's going to be because we gave it to him. There's no way Trump would get elected under the present situation with his racist comments and all that he's doing. And so if he does prevail, it's because we were doing a worse job in the campaign than Trump was doing. And that says a lot. And when you get the likes of Perez, which is the same old, which means the Obama, Hillary, and Wasserman Schultz cabal to go ahead and deny the progressives their true leadership role with the Democratic Party, this is really what the problem is. The progressives have to be given the opportunity, and they will take this opportunity and take control of the Democratic Party and be able to now address the agenda that the people want addressed, That's healthcare, education, infrastructure, immigration, you name it. You name it. That's what the American people are for. But until you get a progressive leadership in the Democratic Party, you'll never see it happen.
How do they do that? How do we get a progressive leadership in the Democratic Party when you've got Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, who are centrists who, in the time of Nixon, would have been to the right of Nixon?
Well, the only thing you can do is in this particular election, which is what I'm trying to do, is to put all of my support behind Bernie and Tulsi, and if they break through, which could happen, I tell you, Bernie could win. I don't know if anybody can beat Trump other than Bernie or Tulsi, and of course that could happen in the primaries, and we'll have to wait and see how it shakes out. But there's a lot of people on the in the field that are there. They're just empty shirts taking up space with people like Buttigieg, who really doesn't say anything, is for everybody, and obviously is a candidate funded by the military-industrial complex. He'll be a puppet for them if he gets into office.
What about Elizabeth Warren?
She's good. She's good. She's got a lot of plans. I would like to see Elizabeth Warren under a Tulsi and Bernie administration be the Secretary of the Treasury. Then she really would cut a fat hog with these corporations and all of that activity. There's some good people that could go to various cabinet positions, but I think the president, the vice president, should be between Bernie and Tulsi.
Okay. Now, the next debate is coming up in September. Are you going to try to get on that one?
No, there's no. I don't have a prayer of getting another 165,000. No, our efforts would be to make sure that Bernie gets on. I think he won't have any problems in making sure that Tulsi gets on. So getting those, and also not Hillary, Sanders.
Okay, so you've built a pretty strong platform. You've got a strong Twitter following. You've had over 68,000 donors. What are you going to do with the influence and power that you've put together between now and, say, September?
Well, let's be candid. It's the two teenage campaign managers of mine who put this together.
All right, tell us about them. Who are they, and give us a picture of who they are.
It's David Oakes. He's 17, 18 years old, and Henry Williams, who's 18 years old, 19. So these are teenagers that really brought me into the candidacy. And I've been running my campaign. All I do is respond for interviews. I don't travel. I don't make any effort to raise any money. It's all been their show from the get-go. And because of the uniqueness of having two teenagers pushing an 89-year-old man to become president, when I'm the oldest person in U.S. history to run for president, that's because of the two teenagers. Now, what we're going to do from here on out is concentrate our efforts on Bernie and Tulsi to make sure that they do get into the final debates and also win the primaries.
So it looks like Tulsi is in the next couple of days is going to raise the money. Her challenge is to get the 2% in more polls. She's done it in one repeatedly, and that's the challenge, I think, for her. It's amazing.
And we'll be campaigning to help her meet that challenge. But she, you see, if the Democratic Party tried to screw her up, that'd be a big mistake, because they can mess around with me because I don't have any power. I'm not in the Senate anymore. But she's in the House and a substantial member of the House. She's on the Armed Services Committee and on Public Works Committee. Not Public Works, Public Affairs Committee. And of course, and the same thing with Bernie Sanders. He's a sitting senator. So there are limits to what the Democrats will be able to do in thwarting the candidacies of these key individuals.
Well, I hope we can get your vision going there. Tell us a little bit more about what your book is about. You've referenced it, but and you're basically saying there's a way that the people can make laws happen. How would that work?
Well, the first thing, the people have to vote to create a legislature of the people. Now, how do you do that? It's going to take a constitutional amendment. And this amendment we have one section that says, Article 1 says that the people are exercising their sovereign powers to make laws, okay? The next thing the next item in the constitutional amendment is that the people sanction the election conducted by a group of volunteers calling themselves Philadelphia 2. They are conducting a national election that permits the people to vote to enact the law in question. Now, that precedent is based upon Article 7 of the Constitution, because that's how our country was created, by turning around and saying that when the conventions of 9 states vote to ratify this constitutional amendment, it becomes the law of those 9 states. Well, we're doing the same thing. We're saying that when you vote for the constitutional amendment to create a legislature of the people, the fact that you voted is now sanctioned by your vote and makes it legal. That's exactly how we created the government. Now, the next item we would do is create in Article 3 is to create an electoral or a citizens trust that will then be able to implement the legislative procedures that are defined in the Legislative Procedures Act, which is a law accompanying the constitutional amendment. Then the next article would be to turn around and say we're going to appropriate the money to pay for the legislature of the people from the Treasury. We're appropriating it via a constitutional amendment, and the amount of money we're appropriating is the amount of money that's appropriated annually to the Congress. Well, if you're going to have a legislature of the people, it should receive the same amount of money as the monopoly legislation of representatives. And so the next thing that you do is you have another article that says that only a natural person can fund, support, and introduce a legislation. Natural person, that means that all corporate activities are out of the picture.
That sounds good.
And we back this up by saying that if you violate this, you're subject to a year in jail and a $100,000 fine for each instance. So then of course, so those are the elements of the constitutional amendment. Now, the parallel act is a federal law which details in great detail the legislative procedures to permit people to act deliberatively as they try to exercise their legislative role. So the first thing that you would do is, suppose you and I want to introduce a piece of legislation that, let's say, repeals God damn it,
Citizens United?
Well, that's one. Okay, let's repeal that. And so what we do is we call up the Citizens Trust and ask them to dispatch a legal staff member to help us draft this legislation to make sure that it's legal, it's constitutional, and properly legalese. That's the first thing. The next thing we do, now there's no charge for that. The trust does that. But the next thing we do is we have to submit a plan for polling so that we can determine if there's at least 40% of the people in the relevant jurisdiction. Because keep in mind, we're going to be able to make laws in every government jurisdiction of the United States. So they're going to be able to have a poll to determine if there's at least 40% of the people that this is a meritorious subject that should be voted on or continued to be processed. And so if we get to 40 million people, the next step that happens is that the trust opens up a website to our specific legislation. And from that website, anything that happens henceforth on our legislation is published on the website with full transparency. So that the first thing that happens now is we assign a hearing officer to do a hearing within the jurisdiction in question on this legislation. And the results of this hearing, which would be pros and cons and experts and public people, that would be then published on the website. Then the next thing after the website, that we would then set up a deliberative committee. Now, legislation under most legislative bodies is done by representative government, by a subcommittee system. So we would create a pool of civically minded or civically educated citizens, which could be anybody with a PhD or a garbage picker, and they would be in this pool. And then when we have the need to address the deliberations of the legislation, we then pull the pool members.
Okay, go ahead.
Now we're at the deliberative committee. So they draw from the pool, could be 10 people, 20 people, and they deliberate, and they have a deliberation person who helps keep them on target. So they now deliberate. They can make changes to the legislation as long as they don't change the intent. Then after the deliberation process, it's sent to the legislative body. So if it's a federal, it goes to the Congress. And the Congress has 90 days to effect an advisory vote. And it's just an advisory. It's not mandatory. And then after the advisory vote, which is to give the people a sense of how their elected officials would vote on this issue. And after that, then it's scheduled for a vote. And the vote takes place over a 7-day period, 24 hours a day. And at the end of that week, the majority of the people voting for it in the affirmative, it becomes the law of the land. Now, this voting has the same limitation as the 40%. We say you needed 40% of the people to agree to want to deal with this. Well, now you say that there's only 52 federal pieces of legislation can be voted on in the course of a year. Because if the voting is a week long, then it means it can only handle 52 weeks of voting. So they would limit the amount of federal legislation to 52 during the course of the year at the federal level, state level, and local level. And then if your legislation is still there, then it will get into the queue in the next year. So that's the process through which people would be able to make laws. Very deliberative, much more transparent than any Congress or legislative body in the world. That's what we will be doing. And we'll be able to accommodate anybody from 100 million to 1 billion people in the voting process.
Is there anything like that at all in the world?
No, this is de novo. And this is a takeoff on the advancement of initiative democracy in the 23, 24 states plus Switzerland. So this is a step forward now that will provide a system of deliberative. Here, if you just equip the people to make laws, it would be anarchy. What you have to do is to equip people to make laws, to take corporations out of the process, clean all that up, and then provide deliberative procedures where the people can do this in an intelligent fashion. And with the website covering every facet of this, you have a guarantee that if anybody wants to know anything about a specific piece of legislation under consideration, all they got to do is go to the website. And it's all there, totally transparent.
Okay, and we need a wrap now. What about you? Is there a website that you'd like people to go to?
Well, the one of my campaign, which is run by the kids, is MikeGravel.org. And then there's another one, which is MikeGravel.us.
Okay, we're back.
They sent me the wrong catheters.
So we're going to wrap now. And basically, what's your Twitter handle so that people can follow you on Twitter too?
Well, I don't know, to tell you the truth.
All right, I'll have it.
The kids have the Twitter account, so I've never tweeted.
It's easy. People can find it if they just search Twitter for Mike Gravel, I'm sure.
Yeah, okay.
All right, so this has been a great interview. Thank you so much for all that you've done. Like I said at the beginning, you're my hero for what you did with the Pentagon Papers. and you're just an amazing guy. If everybody kept going like you have been, and I've been in touch with you for about 15 years now, this world would be a different place. We need more people who, even though they are getting older, keep going. And thank you so much for doing it.
I'll keep going as long as I'm on the right side of the grass.
My guest for this show has been Senator Mike Gravel, former senator from Alaska and 2020 Democratic primary presidential candidate. Thanks so much for being on the show, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rob.
Go.
The bottom-up revolution that you describe in your book is the only way we're ever going to see a revolution or an evolution. The top-down is what we have today. A minority, they control our society lock, stock, and barrel. What we need is a majoritarian control, and that's what you're talking about. And it's only going to come from the bottom up. I just exhort people to get your book, read it, and digest it. That's the answer.
Thanks so much.